Hello, everyone. Today we have Dr. John Patience on the SwineIt YouTube channel. And the topic for today's discussion is managing pig growth during special conditions. Thanks for being here, Dr. Patience.
Well, thank you, Márcio. It's a real pleasure to be with you again.
Yeah, good. Very good to see you this time over the computer here. And so we're gonna have Dr. Patience bio in the description. Very accomplished nutritionist and faculty member, as most of you already know. So Dr. Patience, with the current situation right now, COVID-19, and maybe even other situations where maybe we have ASF coming to the country, hopefully not, or any other things like that where you need to stop the movement, we may need to slow a little bit the growth of the pigs, right? What if you can just give us, it's very rare, but that's kind of the goal of the talk today is have this tool in the toolbox, right?
Right, absolutely. And it's good to have the information ahead of time so you can digest it. And then if you do need to implement it, and hopefully not, but if you do need to implement it, then you are in a position to not have to run around trying to find the information. You already have it available. So, but before we go any further, Márcio, I think it's important to differentiate between feeding programs and management programs that are designed to manage pigs that are at market weight or very close to market weight, and we're not able to ship them for harvest, and so we need to, quote, hold them back a bit, versus a situation where we're trying to slow down growth because we think markets are going to get better. We're going to try to time the market, which we don't recommend, of course. Or worse, we're just trying to reduce our feed cost overall. And that is nothing I say in the next 20 minutes or so is designed for that purpose. And I want to be very clear on that. What I'm going to talk about is short-term things that we can do to lower the cost of feeding those pigs for a short period of time, 1 week, 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks at the most, versus actually trying to reduce our feed cost of production, because that's a whole different topic.
Yeah, thanks for that. That makes sense. And right now, for example, some packing plants having to reduce some shift and things like that. So more of a contingency plan, right?
Exactly right. This is a short-term. These are short-term strategies that can be implemented. Just as you said, if for some reason we're not able to move pigs out of our barn, or if the packing plant for some reason is not able to receive the pigs. So I just wanted to clarify and differentiate that. But so we've got some ideas and suggestions on what producers can do, and there's one that probably most of your listeners would already be aware of, and that would be to bulk up the diet, to feed high fiber ingredients like DDGs or wheat midds or corn germ meal or ingredients of that nature. However, the problem is that we now have ethanol plants that are shutting down, so DDGs are in short supply, and I'm a bit worried that if a lot of people start bulking up their diets, then all of the high fiber ingredients could become either in short supply or very, very expensive. And maybe that's the second general comment I should have made earlier too, is anything that I talk about might be situation specific, and we should always look at the economic implications of what we're doing. And because sometimes the cost of slowing pigs down is greater than the cost of having some pigs go to market heavy. So we do that economic calculation to make sure we're not really practicing false economies. But anyhow, getting back to the point at hand, bulking up the diets is, we know will work. And basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to provide the pigs with diets that are so bulky that they just physically cannot eat enough of that feed to grow maximally. It's the opposite to when we're trying to maximize growth rate. So we try not to increase fiber too high because we know the pigs can't eat enough of the diet. So we're doing the opposite. Now we're trying to increase the bulk of the diet. And I think the thumb rules that we would use here is that we want to get NDF, or neutral detergent fiber, to at least 15% of the diet. That would be what we think is the minimum required to get any amount of reduction in growth rate. But if you really want to slow pigs down, you probably want to get up to 20%. Okay. And because remembering, if we only put a little bit of NDF in, and this is really insoluble fiber, that insoluble fiber, like the fiber in corn and in DDGs, it actually increases the rate of passage through the intestinal tract. So you put a small amount of fiber into that diet, it will increase the rate of passage, and the pigs will actually eat more feed.
For a little bit.
So that's why we say we have to get the NDF up to at least 15%. So that's option number one.
Very good.
Bulk up the diet, and we think that's the most desirable option.
Very good. One comment on that one, Dr. Patience. Last night I was going over a study, and I'm sure you've seen it's a large study we did when I was at PIC. It was made in Canada. 7 levels of energy and NDF, and I was looking at the NDF and also the performance there, and I have some notes here. So, and just remind you that it was throughout the whole finishing period. It's not only like last phase. So throughout the whole finishing period, from 9% NDF, which is corn soy, to 23%, we saw about 7 to 10 days increasing time to market. Just to give some, some numbers for the audience as far as like, okay, how much can we expect? It's gonna be a little bit of a quadratic response there, right? But just want to bring that up.
Yes, that's a very good point, because what will happen is you increase that fiber a little bit, depending on the health status of the pigs and the environment and so on. If they have good access to feed, they'll probably grow at the same rate, but they'll eat more feed, so feed conversion gets worse. So that brings in the issue of economics. But then increase NDF further, then the pigs just can't compensate by eating more feed, and that's when growth rate goes down. Feed conversion continues to get worse, right? The amount of feed per gain is going to continue to increase, and so your 10 days does not surprise me at all at 23% NDF.
Very good. And just remind the folks now, from your comments, we're going to go from the best strategies to the not so desirable, and then what you don't recommend, right? What else would be on your either best or moderate recommendation? Wow.
Yeah, the bulking up the diet is really the best alternative. I think it serves everybody well. It's gentlest on the pig, but as I said, we have to be very careful about the economics of it and what the cost will be, because that could be an issue. But there's a number of other strategies that we offer, but they all have their limitations and therefore concerns. But I'll share those with you. One of them is that we can, in some fashion, try to reduce the feed supply. You can, tighten up the feeders. You can, in some way, you don't want out of feed events. That is not acceptable in any way, shape, or form, because that is very, very hard on the pigs, and that's also going to could lead to gastrointestinal problems like ileitis. It can also lead to tail biting and other issues like that. But restricting access to feed is an option that makes sense. But I just caution, the other big caution with that one is that variability of body weight is going to increase, because when feed is in short supply and the dominant pigs in the pen will get to eat maybe as much as they want, or they'll get to eat more because they command the feeder. and less dominant pigs will get less feed, and the really submissive pigs in that social group, in that pen, will get even less feed. And so the net result will be some pigs will continue to grow well, and some pigs will grow not very well at all, because that's kind of natural selection going on there.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the reasons that we offer caution. It's not that we don't recommend it, but we offer caution if you're restricting access to feed. Another possibility, and this one concerns me a little bit, and that is that we can reduce the ventilation in the barn and allow the barn temperature to go up. And I think it's for every 2 degrees Fahrenheit that the temperature goes above the pig's sort of comfort zone, that feed intake will go down by about 0.1 pound per day. Mm-hmm. So a 10-degree increase in temperature would reduce feed intake by about 0.5 pound a day, which is obviously quite significant.
Right.
But we have to be very, very careful again with that one because of the well-being of the animals. I mean, they're dealing with high temperatures normally anyhow, and so this is not something that's an aberration. But we got to be careful we don't go too far with it, because then it can become a welfare concern, and also it can become a health concern for the pigs as well. So that's another one. The next one, Márcio, is a technically more demanding approach, but we know that it works, and it works well. Mm-hmm. To use a kind of a salt called calcium chloride. Mm-hmm. And calcium chloride is available commercially, and it can be added to the feed. And without getting into the biochemistry of it all, mm-hmm. we know that as you increase the amount of calcium chloride in the diet, you will get a reduction in feed intake. And so we are careful to recommend that maybe 2% calcium chloride is the minimum you're going to want, and it may or may not reduce feed intake, but 4% calcium chloride will substantially reduce feed intake, perhaps 30%. Mm-hmm. Now, again, as I mentioned, it's a technically demanding area because we're adding calcium as well as chloride. And so we have to make sure then that if we're putting in calcium chloride into the diet, we have to take limestone out. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, our calcium gets way too high relative to phosphorus, and that's not healthy. Mm-hmm. So we want to reduce the limestone. What I'm saying is we want to balance for calcium and phosphorus. Mm-hmm. And we want to maintain the same healthy, proper ratio of calcium to phosphorus when we use this product. And so sometimes then we may need to use some another phosphorus source. Obviously, dical or monocal is no good because it adds calcium. Mm-hmm. So something like monosodium phosphate as a product that will bring up phosphorus but not bring up calcium.
Interesting.
So this is a question where you need to have a qualified nutritionist to work with to help define those diets. And again, this is for me, and we did research on this 15, 20, 30 years ago, but we're always a bit concerned about the impact that it may have on bone development. And mm-hmm. so this is something that you can do for 2 or 3 weeks, but maybe 4 weeks at the absolute most, but I'm more comfortable with 2 or 3 weeks mm-hmm. and go longer than that, because I'm concerned that we don't have enough data on long-term feeding of the product and what that might do to skeletal development.
Interesting. And then plenty of water as well, right? For those.
Yeah, with any salt. That's a very good point. Thanks for reminding me, Márcio. Yes, you must have plenty of water so those animals can clear the salts from their system. So that's also important. And then the final one that is in this category of, it's not ideal, but it's bears looking at, And there are various bitter compounds out there that will suppress feed intake in the pigs. And so they can be used, but the reason it's in the less desirable category is I don't think we have enough data on them. But for example, sodium saccharin is a product that will reduce feed intake in pigs if fed at higher levels. But we just don't have the data to be able to say, well, put this quantity in the diet and you'll get this reduction in feed intake.
Right. Okay. Interesting. What before we move on to the other ones, I'm still thinking, actually jumping back here to the best a little bit. Question on the amino acid side of things. What are your thoughts there?
Yep. We looked at reducing amino acids, Márcio, and I need to look into that a little further. But when I go back and I look at amino acid titration, say a lysine titration study, actually feed intake didn't change very much.
Right.
So I'd be concerned that we think that if we lower amino acids, that we're then feeding a poorly balanced diet, and that could reduce feed intake. It'll lower cost of the feed, right? But at least within the range of when we've done amino acid titration, so let's say from 80 or 85% of requirement above, we just don't typically we don't see a drop in feed intake. So we're not recommending that. Maybe if you go much lower, like some people are suggesting diets with very little soybean meal in it, and that one goes under my category of not recommended. It's very low cost, but it's number one, it's quite extreme, and I'm very afraid that carcasses could become overly fat. If we're feeding a diet that's inadequate in protein, we know what's going to happen, and that is that the pig will take amino acids from its body tissue to fulfill those requirements for enzymes and hormones and other things that amino acids are used in the body. Could get less lean in the carcass and much more fat. So maybe in a short term, week or two, maybe it's okay, but I sure wouldn't want to feed it longer than that. I can remember many, many years ago when I was an undergrad and we fed pigs with very, very low protein levels, and their growth rate, it just slows to a crawl. It's just not a good diet for them. And I'm also worried then when you do that, and of course, if we feed that kind of diet, we still put in salt, we still put in minerals like calcium and phosphorus, and we still put in
low energy.
I'm still concerned about tail biting and those kinds of social vices. And one thing to keep in mind, a lot of the potassium in the diet that's essential for the pig comes from soybean meal or protein sources. And if we take that soybean meal out, we better make sure we got enough potassium in that diet as well.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Very interesting. One thing that I've discussed with a few nutritionists the last few days is maybe depending where they are on tryptophan, bringing a little down.
Yes. Yeah. I think there's specific amino acids that we can play with, Márcio, that could. And obviously tryptophan is one of those. It's why tryptophan is so dang hard to study when we're trying to define requirements, because it disturbs feed intake. So, so lowering tryptophan would be potentially an option.
Baleen, a little bit maybe.
But then the question is, how do we formulate the diet to get those deficient? And then what other amino acids? And so if we lower the protein level down to get tryptophan, we're sometimes adding synthetic tryptophan anyhow, so we can take that out.
Right.
Valine, perhaps less so. So if we lower the protein, then we got all those other amino acids that we have.
Right. Yeah. No, only if you're adding synthetically, right?
That's right. And taking out synthetic tryptophan, not a problem, or synthetic valine. Yeah.
Very good. Anything else on the less desirable, or you want to move to the not recommended approach?
Well, probably should go to the not recommended, and and those are when I say not recommended, I mean really not recommended, because they can really come up and bite you on the ankle badly. We know that if we restrict water to the pigs, that will dramatically reduce feed intake, but that absolutely is not recommended because water must be in good supply. So for example, if we restrict water, we can get into salt poisoning very, very easily. And so we do not recommend restricting feed intake, restricting access to water. Another one that we don't recommend is reducing the salt in the diet. That is one that will, especially chloride. People always think, when they're thinking salt, they often think about sodium.
Yes.
If we fed adequate sodium, say with sodium bicarbonate, and lowered chloride, we can really lower feed intake.
Interesting.
I learned that the hard way when I formulated diets many years ago. I shouldn't admit this, but we goofed, and it really impaired feed intake and growth in the pig. So chloride deficiency by itself, but again, that's a very technical area, and it's so easy to make a mistake that I really don't recommend. Those two I just don't recommend.
That makes total sense, Dr. Patience. Let's see here. Anything else before we wrap up? I know we wanted to emphasize something very important that you mentioned is first and foremost, right? The well-being of the animals always, and then regulations, local regulations, all those things that are important.
Absolutely. We just, these are, if this situations arise where animals are not allowed to move, that is worrisome in its own right. But the well-being of the animals always has to be our number one priority.
Very good. Any final words here, Dr. Patience?
No, I think we've covered the waterfront, Márcio. I want to thank you very much. It was great having a chat with you again, and I just wish you well, and hopefully you